Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Lane, and I'm the program manager for alumni volunteers with the University of Maryland Alumni Association. And this event is brought to you as part of our TERP Alumnae series, which is a series of programs to help bring together the TERP women community. But all events are open to all. And we started our TERP Women series with our first ever Women's Leadership Development Conference this past March. And we had a follow-up event in May, a Terrapins Connect Live Women at Work at a company right on the wharf, a nice rooftop venue. So this is the third in our series. And the next event that we'll have is a cooking class that is paired with service opportunities. So be on the lookout for more information about that. That will come in late winter of 2024. But I know you all tuned in not to hear from me, but to hear from our experts about writing a book. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Bridget Russell, our moderator.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited for this event. We've been talking about this for over a year now, about how there's a lot of interest in writing books. Ever since the pandemic, people have been reading more and more aspirations to author a book one day. And so this idea was born, and the people have responded. We have gotten a huge amount of people joining this event, and we're super excited to have you. A couple just small housekeeping items. We got a bunch of questions, which we're super pumped about. We love that you guys have a lot of questions. We're going to try to answer as many of them as we can. A lot of them were really similar to each other. If we do not get to your question and it's a burning question, please put it in the chat later on. We will have questions from the audience if we don't hit yours from the pre-submitted ones. Also, there might be a chance for us to respond via email or written up later if we don't get it to it verbally during this call. Because this event has had so much interest, we are considering some follow-up events, and we might send out a survey about that later on. So please stay tuned. Please stay tuned. This is just the beginning. And now I would like to pass it on to our amazing authors. So we have 4 amazing TERP women authors for you today. They've all graduated from University of Maryland at some point, and they're all doing different things in the world. They've all made very different books, which is super exciting. And so I think I will just pass it on to our first author. We'll start with you, Sara. How about that?
Sounds good. Hi, my name is Sara Goodman Confino. I graduated from the University of Maryland in 2002 and then got my master's degree in 2003. I have been writing for as long as I can remember, and my uncle actually, who also graduated from the University of Maryland back, I don't even know when, actually gave me a typewriter when I was 8 years old and told me that I would be an author when I grew up. He died 10 years ago, so he did not actually get to see that happen, but I like to think that he knows it's out there. I wrote 2 books in 2000. Well, I wrote my first one in 2005. I self-published that one in 2010. I self-published another in 2011 under Goodman. And now under my married name, Confino, I've got 3 traditionally published novels with a 4th that actually got accepted by my editor tonight, which is off like literally 5 minutes ago. So that's coming your way this coming summer. My books that are out right now are called For the Love of Friends, She's Up to No Good, Don't Forget to Write, which I have right here. And the next one is called Behind Every Good Man. So that's me in a nutshell. Kind of been on all sides of this thing.
Thank you, Sara. We'll go on to Katie next.
Hi, everyone. So I am actually not a graduate of the University of Maryland, but I have worked at the Merrill College of Journalism here at UMD for the last 5 years. So I'm definitely a TERP through and through. I just published my first book, a travel memoir, last spring, which is the story of the career break that I took to travel through all 15 countries of the former Soviet Union about 11, 12 years ago. I always loved to write growing up, but then I really kind of got into it while I was traveling. I started a travel blog. I started doing some travel writing on the side. And when I returned from my trip, I got back into working full time, but kept up my travel blog and some of the writing. And always sort of had ideas of writing a book about my journey, but didn't really get into it until everything shut down in March of 2020. And suddenly I had all this extra time on my hands. And so really used that time to really start from my blog posts and journal entries that I took during my trip, and use that to shape into the story that I put together of my journey, which was about 13 months long. And I think one of the big things that I realized during the process is I was sort of constantly waiting for the book to be good enough to work with an editor. And a friend finally clued me into the idea of working with a developmental editor, which is really what pushed me sort of to the finish line, working with somebody who was able to take everything that I had and help me identify the arc of my story, and sort of taking it from a bunch of anecdotes to a real story through and through. And so with her help, I was able to finally put it together, and I self-published last May, and just really looking forward to having this discussion with everyone tonight.
Thank you, Sarah, or Katie, sorry. Thank you, Katie. Let's move on to Pia.
Hello, my fellow Turks. I'm Pia Marie Winters Jordan. I'm a 1978 graduate of the University of Maryland College of Journalism. So I say hello to my, yes, just Katie. I was listening to you. I didn't want to write a book. And since you showed yours, I'll just show the cover. All right. That's why these nurses are behind. Memories of a Tuskegee Airmen nurse and her military sisters. I'm a visual journalist. I do visual stories. But I was working on a multimedia project about the Tuskegee Airmen nurses, because if you look to the right of my head, that's my mom. She was one of the nurses. And so I could have kicked myself that I've been doing all this interviewing Tuskegee Airmen, interviewing the nurses who were still living. I started going from working in broadcast news to teaching at Morgan State in Baltimore in multimedia journalism. And so one of my colleagues, I told her, my mom, she was a Tuskegee Airmen nurse. Oh my goodness, I never did anything. So that she said, why don't you start now? So I did, but my goal was to do a video and audio documentary. And what happened is I said, I'll do a book proposal. And so I put together a book proposal, and there was a publisher interested. So they asked me how long it would take me to write the book. I said, give me a year. And so I wrote the book. Oh, it was a publisher who dealt with stories like what I was going to do about the South, positive stories about the South, kind of positive. And so they, in the meantime, went under the umbrella of the University of Georgia Press. So I'm an imprint of the University of Georgia Press. So they just, it wasn't my goal to be an author. This is it. I'm not doing anymore. I'm doing the video and audio document.
Thank you so much for sharing, Pia. I love that it's your mom as part of the book. And I love that you followed up on this legacy. She's probably so proud to have her story be told. So I think that's really amazing. And last but not least, we have Kim Johnson.
Great. Who believes that Pia's not going to write another book? I think she's going to write another book, y'all. I think you got one in you. Nice to see you all. I'm Kim Johnson. I started writing in 2011. I'm a Maryland graduate from 2003 in the College of Education. I've been in higher ed for 20 years, so I've mostly been supporting, mentoring, leading teams that work to support students. So a lot of my work has been around students. And I started writing in 2011 when I had a story that I could not get out of my head, but I was never really a writer. That was never an identity that I had. It was not something I did when I was a young person. I was an avid reader, but I never thought of myself as a writer because I had a certain sort of image of what a writer was. And I never felt like that was my identity until I realized I was always a storyteller. I was always telling a story in my head. I was always breaking things down. I was always creating. I just wasn't writing it down. And I was really inspired by my students, my college students that I worked with, because they had these big dreams and they were learning new things. And taking on new things. And I felt like, well, they're learning a new language and they're, thinking about the world in different ways. And I started to think about like, I could actually write a book. And so fast forward, I wrote 3 books that weren't published. And in 2017, I got an agent. 2018, I sold my 3rd book that I wrote. In 2020, I was published with This Is My America, which you can't really see it very well. And then I had my 2nd book published, Invisible Sun. And they in 2023, and they're young adult books. I call them social justice thrillers. Usually they're about societal issues, things happening in our world, and they have a sort of a thriller mystery component to it. So I'm really excited to talk with you all about our journeys.
I love the social justice thriller. That should be like a actual new genre. That's great. Well, here are all of our authors who are going to answer these great questions that we have set up for you guys. One other thing I forgot, very exciting item. We are actually going to raffle off to 3 lucky winners. We will announce at the end, but 3 lucky winners will get 1 book from each of our 4 panelists today. So stay tuned and you'll have some books soon. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to go into our next round, which is going to be our curated questions. So these are going to be from each author just feeling out, and it's going to be based on their different processes. So the first question is, how did you get started, or how do you get started? If you want to think back to your first book. And then maybe did this process kind of change does it change based on genre if you've written different genres? So let anyone take the room.
I'll jump in. So it's a very different process whether you want to self-publish or be traditionally published. So having done both of those, I can tell you right now, I prefer the traditionally published side. It's a lot less on me and it's a lot more money than doing it on your own. Like money coming in, not money going out. It's more money going out when you're self-publishing. But the biggest thing, and I am a high school teacher, I teach creative writing, is you've got to sit down and do it. So the book is not going to write itself. I'm a big Stephen King fan, despite writing cute little rom-coms that are kind of bordering on historical fiction. But what he talked about in his book on writing, and this is the advice I give everyone who asks this question, is you need to treat it like a job. And if you needed extra money, you would find the time to go to you'd get a part-time job and you would find the time to go to it and you would do your job. And you need to treat writing the same way, or it's going to be something that never gets finished. You're going to have a book in a drawer that never actually gets done. So sitting down and actually putting your butt in the chair and just writing, even if it's not going to work out, if you're going to need to go back and rewrite it, just sitting down and doing it is the big thing. My personal process has changed tremendously over the last few years. I usually use the summers to write. That was part of why I went into teaching. I knew I wanted the summers to write. It was that or law school. And if I did law school, I figured I was actually a journalism major at Maryland too for 5 semesters before switching. So that's, writing on a deadline. We're all good at that now. But I was always a pantser. I would fly by the seat of my pants. I would know the beginning and know the ending and have no clue how I was getting there. And that wasn't working as well as I thought it was. So a lot of the feedback I was getting early was that it was too disjointed because I was writing out of order. And once I had a deadline and needed to turn in an outline before I could write anything else, because once you're traditionally published, you usually sell the next book before you write it, which is still a strange concept to me. Like I can literally email my editor and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And she'd be like, give me an outline. And then she buys it and gives me money. And it's crazy. Coming from scribbling stories in a notebook for years, that's a very different process. But when you have to outline, it really does help you pull the story together, know where it's going. And while things are going to change from the outline, it is a really useful process. And I'm going to stop talking in a second because I know I talk too much, but I will suggest the book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. That is the one that I found that really revolutionized how I do my plotting process. A lot of it I was doing naturally on my own, but there were a lot of steps that I hadn't thought about that every story really has in common. And it walks you through those commonalities and how to pace your story really well. And the other last piece of advice on that is buy that in paperback, not a Kindle edition, because trying to flip back to the page you're looking for in the Kindle edition is terrible. And I learned from experience, I now have the 2 different versions of that book. but I highly recommend that. Again, it's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And yes, I can post that in the chat. Absolutely.
Well,
I can
since
put
mine is a short story, I'll go next. My process is, I was debating how to tell this story about my mother, as I said, as a documentary. But I'm with Sara. My husband has done a couple of books, self-published. I didn't have the energy to do something like that. I wanted someone to just take over and, do whatever needs to be done for my book to be published. So when I got the publisher, when they were interested, they had everything. I signed the contract. They had the copy editor to look at my, my manuscript. Then I would double check it. I would put the captions in. The only thing I did pay for, because I wasn't going to do it myself, is someone to do the index, because it's time consuming to do an index for a book. And my book is more of a biography, historical biography. So it's probably different than, how the rest of you may have written. But and I'm like this writing, I'm copy. Once I had the idea of what my story was going to be, how was I going to tell this story? My mother was, military, but there was another nurse who had a really interesting story. And I said, oh, I should tell her, but then it should be about my mother. Then finally, once it's like you get the lead, and those of you who are in like broadcast news, once you get the lead, it's like it was telling itself. And I couldn't have done this until I was retired. When I retired, then I started looking at this more seriously, because it's just when you're working and children and pastor's wife and this, it's just like, it was just too much. So once I was able to kind of slow down and I had someone interested in the book, like Sara was saying, maybe I would do a little at a time. And actually, I have a screenplay that I won an award for. And I would get up early in the morning when everybody was asleep, like 6 a.m., and write like one scene. But I had to do something similar with the book. It's like, I decided, okay, what were the chapters going to be? All right, I'm going to work on this. And as it was like this building, as I looked into this, I said, okay, this blends in with that. Oh, let me tell this story on what was happening, when my mother was doing this and when the Tuskegee Airmen did whatever. Oh, and you got to get the book because I got some stories. But anyway, and that's how I did it. It's just like, give me the lead, and then I just step by step by step by step. And that's the way I did it. But I did it more so like I was writing doing a script for a newscast.
Okay, amazing. I love hearing these differences between different genres.
I can jump in next. So I think my journey is probably a little bit different. I touched on it a little bit in my intro. But as a memoir, and everything was sort of my personal story. So a lot of mine was sort of figuring out what aspects of my journey to include or not to include. I probably didn't do things that I probably missed a window of opportunity of not writing my book and trying to publish it shortly after I took the trip. And I had a very active travel blog. I was part of a very active travel blogging community and doing a lot of travel writing. And I probably had a much larger platform at the time that if I had wanted, if I had really dedicated myself to publishing the book back then, I probably would have had more of a chance of finding an agent and going the traditional publishing route. By the time I did get around to writing the book, I dabbled in approaching agents and put some queries out, but really was sort of got to the point where I was just anxious and wanted to just get it out there. And I didn't want to sort of take the time of, just going through getting an agent and then going through a publisher and kind of wanted to maintain a lot of that creative control myself. It definitely was a lot more work. I realized, I probably didn't do as much marketing and promotion early on and before publication as I should have, because I was just trying to get the book finished. And I'm the kind of person I have a really hard time doing things like an hour here, an hour there. When I'm writing, I need to sit down for a very, like 3 to 4 hours at least, very focused period of time. And so I did a lot of my writing and editing, doing, weekend getaways, staycations, writing on vacation, trying to find long periods of times or whole weekends when I was able to just really, really focus in, because just trying to do like an hour here and there in the mix of my normal work week, just wasn't, I'm not able to focus that way. So it probably took me a lot longer to get through it. But for me, it was sort of just a personal passion and wanting to get my story out there. And I did go grab a picture of the book, a copy of the book, so you can see it. I personally am in love with my cover. A friend of mine designed the cover for me. And so I think that was something that, again, going the self-publishing route, I was able to take a lot of, just maintain that control and, have a friend design the cover. And I have some cool maps inside that somebody else designed that shows the journey of where I went. Yeah, I will stop talking now and turn it over to Kim so she can share her journey.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I had a similar experience with Sara, I think, in terms of process. I'm a true believer, like button chair. You have to do it. I talk with writers all the time who are working, and they have that hope to finish that first novel, the draft of that first novel. And sometimes perfectionism is the biggest hindrance from you actually finishing your novel. And once you actually write your full draft, and I think going through the process of publishing books, whichever way, whether it's self-publishing or traditional, you really realize that sometimes you aren't starting the story where it needs to start, or sometimes there's characters or different elements of your story that don't need to be there. And then imagine you might have spent months working on 3 chapters that might not even belong there anymore. And so I'm a true believer in, you just have to sit down and write, get that first draft down. I call it, I resonate with the 0 draft model of just writing it out. Initially, that's really how I started. And I was a pantser, which is really just, going from, intuition and idea and just going for it. And I think it's a great way to start if you have a lot of ideas and you just want to get into the practice, or you just want to be able to say, hey, I finished a novel, from that process. As I've now published more, I definitely started to recognize, because I write a story that has these sort of other elements that have thriller and mystery, where it's really important to have particular plot points occur on top of sort of the larger topic area that I'm writing. I really recognize the importance of an outline, and especially being on deadline. So like once if you have a traditional publisher, or even if you're on sort of your own, publishing schedule where you have goals of when you want your books to come out, it is super important to meet them, meet those deadlines. And I have found now that outlining is really important to my process, which is the plotting point. But I still consider myself the mix of the two, a planter. Often I have to be struck with an idea. I love to free write the first 20,000 words, because if I can free write the first 20,000 words, that means a story has a true hold on me. And then I will stop and I'll begin actually plotting and outlining the book and really sort of get it going. The other, I want to share the advice that I always give all the time too, is that I think that there's really great advice about writing every day, even if there's 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I think I definitely recognize when I can do that it becomes easier for me to jump into the work. But the reality of my life is that doesn't actually work with my schedule, working full time, having kids I'm raising, volunteering, all the different things that come with life. And my books, I typically write on weekends. Saturday and Sunday, chunks of time where I dedicate 3 to 4 hours, and the family knows that I have to focus on my writing. And you will find that you will become, at least for myself, will become a very efficient writer, because that this is the only window. You got to wait all week. You got to get through the work week to be able to get that time. And I find myself less distracted that I will jump right into the story. I write with music, and I have music that's specific to the books that I'm writing, because that helps my muse remind myself about that. And that helps me with the gap of having to wait so long. And then I will take chunks of vacation. So like my week's vacation where, I have friends who are, going to the coast or going to Italy or doing these amazing experiences. Everyone's at work, my husband's at work, my kids are at school, and I am just waking up and, and writing. And I do that in chunks. And then once I have, sorry, this is kind of long, but I'm almost in. Once I have my novel down and I'm in the revision stage, then it actually becomes easier to jump in every day, because I can say, let me edit this chapter that's already done. I just need to go through the revision process for this particular character. Then I can sneak in that 30 minutes in a way that makes it really hard for me any other time. So
these are great answers. I think all the time you guys gave is great to all of these. I think in summary, just start writing, like sit down and start typing, writing, whatever, or speaking. I saw this otter question. That's really interesting too. And that things will change and evolve as you go. So there's no point in perfection. This reminded me of a book I listened to from Lauren Graham, the Gilmore Girls actress, wrote a book. She's written a couple, but her first book, I remember her talking about requiring herself to sit down for an hour every day. And it didn't matter if she didn't write anything, but it's almost like a habit forming thing that she was going to sit in front of her computer every day for an hour and try to write something. And then eventually, like, you'll have good days and bad days. So anyways, it just made me think of the setting aside time. And that's a great audiobook to listen to if anyone's wondering. Okay, so we've hit the, like, how do you just get started? You start writing. Let's go to the next question, which is, you've maybe written your first draft or you have something. What's the process of finding a literary agent or getting editorial feedback while protecting your ideas and concepts? It's kind of a mouthful, and I know you guys touched on that a little bit, and I can post this question. I'm going to post this question in the chat so people can see. Second question.
I'll start again. Getting a literary agent is one of the absolute worst parts of this entire process for literally everyone. I honestly don't think I know anyone who's like, oh yeah, that was easy. Like, no. Getting an agent, they actually say that you get rejected 12 times for every time anyone is even willing to look at a chapter, not even the whole book, a chapter or two. And a lot of times you don't even hear anything at all. So I signed with my first agent in 2012. I started looking at what they were looking for, which is advice I would definitely give you. Every agent tends to list what genres they're looking for. And I was writing I had written a comedy about teaching. I designed it to be a series of vignettes, basically covering a whole year, which is not a concept that will sell. So just FYI, if that's anyone's plan, not a thing. But I found an agent who was interested in a book set in a school, and she signed me, and I was super excited. And then pretty much nothing happened. She got heavily into romance, and she wanted to make my book into a romance, and it really was not a romance. And she had me rewrite this thing probably 75 times. I mean, it was insane. Like, I dreaded emails from her completely. She was also fairly negative about a lot of stuff, and just anytime I got an email from her, I didn't want to look at it, which is a bad sign. She eventually was like, I think we need like a steamy makeout scene here. And like I said, it was a teacher at a school. I was like, who do you want her making out with? Because can we not do that? But no, thank you. She then left and went to another agency, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, because she recommended me to 5 other agents. We split on very good terms. She's read all of my books that are out now. She's been in touch. She's, now that she's not my agent, I adore her. She's great. But as an agent, we did not click. One of the people she recommended me to, she and I just completely clicked. It was, love at first sight. And that's my agent now. And very quick version of the story. So for my first novel, I sent her the first draft, and for the love of friends, I sent it to her. And because she actually gave me the advice that my other agent should have given me years earlier. I was with her for 5 years, and she should have told me earlier, it's time to put this book in a drawer and do something else, write the next one. And my current agent told me that, and it was exactly what I needed to hear, even though I didn't want to hear it. And I wrote For the Love of Friends, and I sent it to her, and then she sent back revisions. And about 10 weeks later, I heard from her again and she was like, am I going to see these revisions soon? And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm throwing up every 5 minutes. I'm 10 weeks pregnant. We're not telling people yet. Like, I will finish it the second I hit second trimester. And she called me and she was like, I'm 11 weeks pregnant. Wouldn't it be crazy if we had the babies on the same day? Fast forward to May of 2020 when everything's falling apart. And she kept saying, I just want to sell the book and then we can, have the babies. Just want to sell the book. We got a 2-book deal. And a week later, I texted her a selfie from the car and said, I think I'm winning. And she sent back a picture from her car saying, don't be so sure. And the babies were born on the same day, 5 hours apart. So she and I are bonded for life. We're going nowhere. I got offers from a couple of other agents now that I'm like established, and she is my girl. I'm sticking with her. We are, and that's an important thing when you're getting a literary agent. It needs to be the right fit. They work for you. So they don't get paid unless you get paid. This isn't a situation where you're working for them, even though it feels like it when they sign you. And if it's not the right fit, they are not going to find the right place for your book either. You need somebody who really understands your work, who understands you, and who has the same vision for it as you do. If they want to change literally everything about it, this is not your person. And it's hard to go from, having somebody interested to be like, no, thanks, you're not right for me. But if they're not right for you, they're not going to get you where you want to go either. I saw in the chat people were asking where to find a literary agent. One of the things that I actually did was I looked at books that inspired me or were some of my favorite authors, and I looked up who their agents were and I started querying their agents. That wasn't necessarily that useful, but once I kind of went down that rabbit hole, I did find other people who I thought would be a good fit. We'll let other people jump in on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And I'm trying to put this in the chat of what I used a ton that was super helpful when I was researching agents. I'm sure there's lots of others, but Query Tracker for me was when I was like serious and ready. I created an account and was able to track all the agents and just research. It just gave me a place to research. So it was, tons of great advice from Sara, and I wholeheartedly agree. You have to find someone who gets what you're trying to do with your work. And there should be someone that I think it's okay for them to challenge you. It's okay for them to push you, but it has to resonate with you. And I think the process of me writing my first book and then writing my second book helped me identify who I am as a writer and what I was trying to write in my work. And through that process, I also submitted to a lot of agents. So the first book I ever wrote is I learned how to write a book kind of thing that no one's going to see. I'm never going to pick up that book again. It's done. I spent 2 years on it, queried it to over 100, probably 120, 130 literary agents over that kind of like a year time period, received rejection after rejection. But it helped me really learn about where to enter my story and how to write a query letter that would attract an agent to actually want to read more. So in terms of a process when you're seeking a literary agent, a lot has changed since I've been through the process, but generally what I found was you would submit a query letter, and Query Tracker and lots of research online. You can Google it. You can find how to write a query letter online, lots of great resources. Typically then you'll send like a chapter or 3 chapters, whatever their specifications require you to send. And what I would note is that by the time that I was done with my first novel and had submitted it a bunch of times, what I realized was that if I wasn't getting any hits from my query, that it might not have been the work that needed more adaptation. It actually might have been the query letter. And so I was able to really test out a lot of stuff. And so when I finally got my query letter changed and I started to get more requests, when I would get a 50-page request, I'd say, oh, it's working. But then when I would not get any more requests after that, I'm like, okay, something's going on with the story. And it would help me figure out the pace in my story, which for writing young adults, really important to get the sort of the pacing right for the story. And so I learned that. And then in my second book, I actually did get a lot of great responses from agents and folks who wanted to revise with me. And I went through a revision process with an agent, which is not an agreement. It basically is just saying you will revise, and if they like it, they'll represent you. And I went through the process. I was so excited. At that point, I was so desperate. I was willing to like connect with any agent at the time. I worked on the revisions, and they didn't, they liked what I did, but they just weren't ready to represent me. And so fast forward, when I started writing my third novel, I really knew who I was as a writer. And I really had started through that process identifying the kind of agent that I wanted, because there's so many agents. And if this is the track that you're really interested in, it's so important to learn about. Do your research on what is a good agent, the kinds of things that you should look out for, because there's a lot of bad agents out there that you can find. And so I definitely would utilize Query Tracker. I definitely would look at within your genre. Like if you're writing within a particular genre, pick up that book, go to the bookstore, go to the library. In their acknowledgments, they're going to say who their agent is. Go to their website, you're going to see who their agent is, and you'll start to learn more about the agencies and the space in which you kind of want to sort of like circle yourself around. And I think that's a really great way to find that. And the last thing that I'll say is that I think if you really, really want to be published, there is that pressure to feel like you just want to do it now. And I think it's really important to stop and pause and think about what your goal is and what you're trying to do. And, I knew I didn't have the skills for self-publishing, because just the mechanics of getting it uploaded, it would be a fail for me. Like it just would be a constant, or even just like identifying a cover, like it just would be a mess. And so I knew I didn't have those kind of like skills for there, but some folks really do have it. So I think it's important to figure out, what do you want to do? And then be patient, because if you want to be a writer, it is a hopefully long career for you. And so those books will matter. Each book you write should matter in the long run.
Katie and Pia, do you all have anything to add to that?
I'll pass on this one since I went the self-publishing route.
Yeah, I'll pass. I didn't go for an agent.
Okay. Thank you, Sara and Kim, and for all the chats going on too, with all the help information. I feel like in summary, what I'm hearing is you have to find the right agent for you. And that's hard when someone, you want to feel wanted and someone says, I want to be your agent. And then it feels like you're turning them down, which is probably awkward. But, and then it sounds like there's a lot of different ways to find agents. So Kim, thanks for sharing that information. I had no idea about these different ways, and just looking up books and different agents is what a genius idea. Is there anything, Kim and Sara, that you want to add based on some of the questions here, or would we like to move on to the next question?
Let me address one thing from the chat. People asked about legitimate agents versus scam people. So if you are trying to go the traditional publishing route, it's important to know you are not paying people. So there's a lot of what's called hybrid publishing these days. And let's talk briefly about hybrid publishing, because there are a couple of companies that are semi-legit on it. But for the most part, what it is a vanity press, where you are paying somebody to publish your book, and they package it beautifully. They say, oh, you're just putting up the money up front, and then we're going to do all the marketing. But most of those companies don't actually market your book. They make their money off of you as the author. So for example, somebody that I know went with a hybrid publisher and has sold 3 copies. And it's because they price it high. They are not planning to sell your book at that point. If you are planning to self-publish, you may need to pay for like editing and somebody to design a cover and things like that. But paying a company to publish your book for you, that's going to be a vanity press, and they are not going to market that thing for you. So same with agents. If they want money, run. That's not a thing. They get paid when you get paid. And that's how you know they're going to work really hard to sell your work, because they're not going to make any money if they don't believe in you and don't feel that they can sell it.
Yeah, definitely on that. I put a couple of other things in the chat. There's some really great folks in the industry who have some really great blogs. I will try to put those in there. Jane Friedman has a wealth of information. Yeah, someone says that. Really, really great, super helpful. On Query Tracker, you actually can see people's feedback about how long it took them or any kind of concerns. And my general rule is if you see something repeatedly about like they did this thing and it's a typical thing that they shouldn't do, like that should be a red flag. And just be like, don't do it. I haven't used this because it's been, several years, but I did use Writer Beware, that, at least historically gave some really good sort of advice about, publishing and that kind of thing. General things to look out for is how long has the agency been around? Okay. What is the background of that actual agent? There's a lot of, I say a lot, but maybe it's extreme, but there are agencies that pop up, and they're folks who haven't actually really ever been an agent before and started their own agency, because anyone can actually do that. And so how you find out, how long they've been there is you can use things like Publishers Marketplace to identify, have they sold books? So the key thing is that if you have an agent, you want to make sure they've actually sold books, sold books to publishers. And if they're a new agent, that's fine. You have to look at, in their agency, is their agency an agency that has a good reputation of selling books? And you can find that out. You can research that, and seeing on their website, not just their clients, but actually have they sold books, and that tells you a lot more, and tells you how recently, what kind of publishers they've sold it to. If they sold it to a lot of these vanity presses or maybe smaller presses, that tells you that they sort of have a particular angle, or maybe they actually don't have access to publishing. So lots of great resources online. I mean, I feel like I got like a PhD in publishing by just looking at social media and publishing sites. There's so much information that's online, but I'll try to plug more in the chat for y'all.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Sarah, for diving more into that. Okay, so our third general question we have is, how can we reach out to publishers? Which we've already kind of started talking about this, but I think it would be nice to talk more about self-publishing route and hear from Katie and Pia on this. So how did you go about self-publishing, and how was that process?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So I did a couple things. One, I think as Sarah, Kim alluded to, part of with self-publishing, I mean, you're basically doing everything yourself. And so once you actually write the book, there's a number of different venues to get it out there in the world. I basically focused on sort of three main areas. I actually worked with a local bookstore here in DC that offered a self-publishing package. And the main thing that was attractive to me about that was that they were willing to format the book for me, which was the thing that I think I found the scariest, because I'm not a graphic designer or just anybody with those skills. So they were willing to format for me. And then they also had a guarantee that they'll carry it on their shelves for a year. And so as a self-publisher, the idea of actually having my book on the shelves in a bookstore was pretty cool and appealing. And it was a couple $100. And to me, that was worth it, for them to be able to sort of take care of all of that formatting stuff for me. And then from there, I put it on Amazon, which I think, I think the statistic is like 70% of all books or something are sold on Amazon now. And so, as much as you can love or hate Amazon all you want, I think particularly as a self-publisher, it's one of the main ways to get your book out there. And so I did both a Kindle version and a paperback version. I did not do a hardcover version. And then I also uploaded it to a distributor called Ingram Spark, and they're a distributor that if any bookstore, or if a lot of bookstores work with them to actually carry it on their shelves. And so, for example, I'm from a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. My independent bookstore in my hometown was willing to carry my book, and so they were able to order it through Ingram Spark to get several copies to have on their shelves. And then through Ingram Spark, it also shows up on websites like Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, I think like Walmart.com, and some other ones. And so those were sort of the two main routes. Probably one of the more challenging things I found was that Ingram Spark and Amazon had slightly different templates for the formatting. And so even though the bookstore I worked with went and did all the formatting for the books that they would have on their bookshelves, when I went to upload to Amazon and to Ingram Spark, they were off by like not even centimeters. I mean, just like such a tiny margin. So I had to go back. Luckily, the friend that designed my cover, he was able to do some of those changes for me and take care of that for me. So that was a huge help. But it was definitely, I mean, I went to so many different websites on self-publishing. I joined some Facebook groups on self-publishing, asking tons of questions. And so figuring it out myself was definitely more complicated. I mean, it was almost harder than writing the book. But you know, I think as I mentioned, my process was so long that by the time I finally finished the book, I just wanted to get it out there, and I didn't really have the patience to, you know, to go through and you know, and to wait for an agent and then to go through the traditional publishing route. But it's worked pretty well for me. I've been pretty happy with it. And, you know, I think the thing I wish I would have done was just start all of that sooner. I think I waited too long to really get into the nitty gritty of the how of self-publishing. I kind of waited until I thought that the book was basically done being written. And then I started looking into, oh, okay, what next? And I realized like, oh, if I want to set up pre-sale, I should have done this a couple months ago. If I wanted to, you know, I should have been doing pre-sale and doing marketing and, you know, reaching out to all of these other platforms to market the book before I actually published it. So I think that's probably the one thing, if I was to do it again, I would do that differently, just in terms of the timing.
One thing I want to bring, I was published, I have a publisher, so I'm not self-published, but what I found, the reason why this publisher wanted to do my book, they saw that this book is historical. So basically the information is not going to change. So over the years, they saw that they could make money over a period of time. But what I had to do as far as the book proposal, first of all, I had a colleague who had written books, and he gave me a copy of his book proposal. Then my dean gave me suggested how to write a book proposal, gave me that. Then I identified what publishers have written similar books. And this one publisher, it was New South Books. I'm doing something about the Tuskegee Airmen nurses, so the Tuskegee Airmen. So I knew there was this one publisher, and that's what they had done a book about the Tuskegee Airmen. So I may have tried others, but I researched who can I target? Who am I going to target? What publisher I'm going to target? And so I sent the proposal and they wanted the book. And one of the things that was good, because since I was going to do a video documentary, audio documentary, I was doing video interviews. I was going all over the country doing these interviews with Tuskegee Airmen and Tuskegee Airmen nurses, keeping in mind they were in their 90s. And basically they're all dead. Everybody in my book was pretty much gone. So I had to, as my colleague suggested, you got to get those interviews first. But for writing the book, I had my quotes. My sound bites became my quotations. So that worked for me. And my publisher does everything. They pre-sold the book. They let me know if a radio station's interested, different things. A lot of stuff I do on my own, because everywhere I go, I talk about my book. And so, the Museum of History said, oh, you got a book coming up? They had me present and do a book signing. I was at a church, visiting a church, and of course I talk up my book. And because mine is part of a project, I tell them about the entire project. This book is just one thing out of a lot of other things. So I just talk it up, and then my publisher will say, hey, Pia, there's a radio show in Alabama. They're interested. My story's set in Alabama, Tuskegee Army Flying School in Tuskegee, Alabama. So then too, my publisher did ask, they have sent me a marketing plan. They ask me questions. You know, do you have a social media? Who would you suggest that we contact? And I give them names, addresses, and all. But a lot of times, as I hear things, I will email. You know, okay, hey, okay, my mother grew up in Virginia. Let me contact the state library association. And they said, okay, we're going to get a book. And then my book, which worked really well, my book is based on all the 28 nurses who served at that base. I have research on every one of them. So each nurse has relatives. And so relatives who have relatives who are finding out there was a historical connection with their relative. So basically I'm talking up everything, but my publisher, they're providing a lot of support because, as I said, I just didn't want to do it. I couldn't. And two, I'm older than all of you all. So right now I'm a senior, a seasoned citizen. So I didn't want to, the stuff I had to do, I didn't want to do that. That's my story. I'm going to stick with it.
Thanks, Tia. And that touched a lot on the marketing aspect too, which is going to be our next question. I was just going to ask if Kim and Sarah, if you have anything small to add on to the just about publishers and your process for that.
I got asked in the chat about how it works money-wise when you sign with the publisher. I'm happy to go through that really quickly because I think that is a question that I get asked pretty often. So the way that it works when you sign with a publisher, so self-publishing, you get paid per copy sold, you get a certain percentage of that, and it's just a royalty statement monthly, basically. Signing with a publisher, you typically get what's called an advance. And advances for a first-time author are a lot smaller usually than you're led to believe. Like, you know, you watch all these movies and people are getting $1 million for their first book, and that's not how it goes typically. They say the average for a debut author is about $10,000. So let's work with that number because it's a nice round number, so it's easy to figure out. Here's the part where it gets interesting. So they do not give you a full $10,000. Your agent gets 15% off the top. So you're down to $8,500. You usually get, if the book's done, you'll get that as one chunk typically. Some publishers break it up into multiple chunks. It depends on the publisher. Mine did it as one chunk for the advance. For the first book. The second book, I got the second half of the advance when they accepted the book because I had a 2-book deal. That $8,500 after that, let's say that's where you're sitting, you are going to pay a ridiculous amount in taxes. You are considered self-employed. My cousin, who is an accountant, who is also a UMD grad, told me to set aside about 50% of what I earned until we saw what it actually boiled down to. And it is at about, I think, 42%, which is insane. Like, it's ridiculous. And a lot of other authors did not believe me in my debut group, and they came to regret the decision. So one of the things my cousin told me is you want to spend as much as you can on marketing and supplies and like these gorgeous ring lights that have me looking all flawless. Those were tax deductions because I needed them for book events. So things like that, like when I bought a new laptop, that counts. Write down every penny you spend because that's going to save you money in the end. But assuming it's about 40%, you are now down to $5,000 from your initial $10,000 advance. You will not see another penny until you have earned out that advance, which does mean that you need to sell enough copies to cover back that full $10,000 amount, not the amount that you are left with. And that is not at $15 a book or whatever it is. It's usually, so for my publisher with Kindle copies, I get 35% of the profit, which works out to usually about $1.40. Mine are about $4.99 on there for each book. The paperbacks, I get 10% of the list price, not the sale price. So Kindle books, for example, if they're on sale, if it's $1.99, I get less money for those sales. For the paperbacks, I get the same amount, no matter who buys it, where they buy it, any situations with that. Here's the really fun part. If your book is in stores, after 3 months, most stores will send back a whole bunch of stock, and you then wind up paying that basically. So those returns, you aren't losing $1.50 from the sale, you're losing $15.99 or whatever your book costs out of your advance money. So a lot of people really don't earn out their advances with that. I've been lucky. I got picked for first reads for my second 2 books, and I've earned out all 3 at this point, which is awesome because I'm getting money and it's nice. But that's really a hard stage to get to. And it's a very strange setup because, you know, you hear, oh, I'm getting X amount of money, and you're getting half of that at the end of the day. So it is very hard for authors to actually make a living off of their books. A lot of people have done a different version of hybrid publishing. Don't confuse this with the ones who are scamming you, where they are with a traditional publisher and they're also self-publishing books on the side to kind of boost those sales. So there's an expression in publishing that your front list sells your back list. And I have very much seen that as true. So for example, when my second book, She's Up to No Good, was in Amazon First Reads, I sold 20,000 copies of For the Love of Friends that month because people read that one and then went back to my first one. And that definitely, so if you're not planning to write another book, I'm gonna break your heart here, you're not going to get that bump. But it does help with that, and it is possible to earn out, but the more books that you put out more rapidly is what a lot of people have found, the more of a bump you get because people are still thinking about you and they're kind of hungry for those books. So that is my breakdown on the money. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything on that.
I'll add with so I'm with Penguin Random House, and before the pandemic, our breakout of our advance was 3 times. After the pandemic, it's generally 5, although my agent negotiated 4. And so I'm just giving you an example of the 4. What does that mean? That means the sort of partial right away, another partial when I turn my copy edits in and they've accepted the copy edits. The 3rd is on publishing day, and the 4th is 6 months after publishing day. So if you think about, even if I got a huge, let's now throw a big number. Say I got $100,000. Oh my God, the family's like, quit your job. No, because in traditional publishing, at least for the space that I'm at, that would be 3 years essentially. Like selling your book. Penguin Random House has a like 18-month lead out of like anything that you do, and so that would be breaking that up. Then you minus all the taxes. You cut that 42%. You got your agent split. That's why a lot of writers are, you know, unless they have support or financial backing in some kind of way, a lot of times they're still working.
Well, for me, I had a contractual agreement and I got no advance. But what happens with me, twice a year, they give me a report on how many books were sold. And so by then I figured out, okay, they're selling at this price, they sold this price. Okay, this is how much I made. But what I found when my book was actually launched by a local bookstore, I got the report. And from the pre-sales, there were like 300 books had been sold, which I thought was pretty good because I'm a first-time author, and I hope I had a lot of friends and relatives out there getting the book. But now I'm waiting for the second report to let me know how many books were sold now after its official launch. But you know, for me, I didn't really write for the money, although I hope to get some money. I haven't gotten anything in my hand yet, and it's supposed to be coming. But when I figured it out, I think I probably am making like $1.05 for every book that's being published. But like I said, I didn't want to do the self-publishing route. If they're doing all that work, you know, great. I appreciate it. Get your money. But I didn't want to deal with having to do my own stuff. And I realized my husband is self-published and he'll be saying, we'll get the book, we'll sell it, we'll make more money, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't have the energy for that. I don't want to do that. And he does that. He makes more money, but he's self-published. He should be on here too, but he's not a University of Maryland alumnus. So, I'm sorry, Katie, you aren't either, but you're with the College of Journalism.
Yes, we accept you, Katie.
So I'm done.
Okay, well,